Today, I've got a powerful woman who knows to bring life in small businesses and startups. She has worked with great companies like TV18, VC Circle, and Angels Network. She was the former CEO of Angels Network. Yes, I'm talking about Miss Chandni Jaffrey. Miss Chandni Jaffrey is currently leading the role of founder and executive director of a company named SLSV, that is Sounds and Light Social Ventures. I'm truly excited to have her on the season 2 of the Women's Stories, and I'm looking forward to a brainstorming conversation with her. Let's deep dive into the conversation.
Thanks a lot for accepting my invitation, and it's an overwhelming feeling to have you on the second episode of the season 2 of the Women's Story. So, thanks a lot for coming on to my podcast. And so, how have you been doing lately?
I'm doing great. Thank you, Kushi, for having me. Like I was telling you over the call before, that I get very excited when I see people like you with this amazing entrepreneurial spirit, trying to do interesting things and breaking stereotypes and trying to sort of create a platform which not only benefits them but also inspire their larger community in the ecosystem. So when I saw all that, when you reached out to me, I was pretty excited about this, and I'm happy to be here today. Thank you for having me.
As I already said, that there is a lot to learn, but before starting anything, I would like you to enlighten us with your current roles and responsibility at SLSV in a layman language.
Right. Okay. So I founded SLSV in 2014 to basically assist corporates and startups and not-for-profits come together on one platform, because I felt that there's this whole need gap in terms of all of these entities working in silos and not really. When I think that they could come together, collaborate, and there's a lot of value that can be unlocked. And around that same time, the CSR law was promulgated by the Indian government. And so I think that gave some level of structure to how this can be done. So SLSP largely is an investments, media, research, and consultancy network. And we assist startups and corporates and other not-for-profits who want to create impact. Okay, and the way we define impact, so impact can be a very fuzzy, feel-good factor, but actually the way we look at impact is that it's a very concrete deliverable that you can chase as a business owner, as a not-for-profit, as a social entity, and and that we define as three P's, or triple bottom line, which is people, planet, and profit. So when all these three things come together, if you may, if that Venn diagram, you have these three circles and they come together, that's when you get impact. Okay, so we are here to unlock that value, which is inherent. It just needs to come together through this whole idea of collaboration. So I hope that gives you a good idea. So our media network today has actually users coming across from 30 plus countries. So our number one traffic comes from, of course, India, but followed by USA, and then the entire European countries who are looking at this, who have already kind of maybe understood the value through, because they're just a little ahead in terms of development curve. So we want to allow the Indian companies also and startups to understand how this can add to their bottom lines, as in addition to kind of helping delivering on environmental, social, and cultural sort of outcomes. So that's what it is.
I would be pleased if you may provide a short case study of the investment strategies of startups in your perspective, successful startup precisely.
Right. So first of all, this may sound a bit sort of shocking for you to hear, but I don't really believe that every startup needs to raise funds. First, step number one. Okay, now it's almost become like a natural sort of a step for anybody who's considering to become an entrepreneur. They always think, okay, so how am I going to raise funds? So for them, apparently, there is no startup without fundraising. So that's I think myth number one. because there is overwhelming research to support that there are business ideas and startups which can manage without getting private equity funding into them by actually becoming a real consumer proposition from early on. So many times we had early stage funding as a crutch without really understanding how our business model is going to deliver on its key value proposition without really streamlining that. So my sort of advice number one to startups and entrepreneurs is to have a very clear value proposition, which, and then you look at investing not as the only reason how you can exist, but as a partnership with like-minded people, with mentors who are always also interested in your business and they can grow with you. So that's step number one and advice number one. So do not look at investors and investing as a crutch. Please work on your value proposition. So work on your, it's called MVP, minimum value viable proposition. So make sure that you have done all that work before really you even, and why do you want to? So you have to be very clear. Why do you want to be an entrepreneur? Number one. And why do you want to then raise funding? What is the objective? So if the answer to the first question is, oh, I don't know because it's fancy, because everybody's entrepreneur, oh, I hate a 9 to 5 job, oh, etc., etc. So these are not good enough reasons to become an entrepreneur, right? The reason to become an entrepreneur is that it should come from your internal guidance. It should be something, one, it should be based on a skill that you're really, really good at. And you're so good at it that you can actually monetize your skill. So there is no substitute for building a core skill before you actually build a product. So if you're a tech guy, you should have that core skill, and then you create a proposition which actually delivers and solves a real problem. Okay, and then you say, hey, now I'm solving this problem, and it would be nice to have partners, and it would be nice to have investors to help me fund and scale, and so that I can reach out to more people and solve problems at a bigger scale. So I think this is really, really important for all entrepreneurs and startups to understand and know. So that's number. Have a core skill and develop and fine tune that core skill over a period of time. So, so like, for example, you do podcasts and you probably think that you have a flair for writing or you have a flair for reaching out to people. So you have to, so these skills need to be constantly honed. It's not like, oh, let me just, oh no, I just want to be an entrepreneur. So that's really, really, really important. So those are the things that we consider. These are the soft filters that we use when we are talking to entrepreneurs and startups. So what drives them? It has to be more than passion. It has to be a concrete skill that they bring to the table. Okay, so these are the soft skills that we look for. Then in terms of, well-defined sort of hard parameters that you're looking for in startups is, of course, we have a business plan. Do they have a minimum viable proposition which is successful? Are they revenue generating, not revenue generating? How are they? Do they have? Is it a scalable proposition? Because it's extremely important for early stage capital to back ideas which are scalable, meaning they can be replicated really quickly. It's not just a hockey stick growth. Like I said, these are the ideas which right now, if I'm able to solve a problem maybe for 100 people, so how quickly can I adapt my solution to solve the problem for, let's say, 1 million people? That's what scale means, So is it scalable? We look at that. Then we look at, do you have the ability to form collaboration? You have the collaboration skills. Do you have a team in place? So because it's very, very important to have that ability to quickly form networks around you so that they also rally behind your idea. So let's say you're a tech guy and that's your core skill. Now you would probably need a sales and marketing guy. Okay, so just see, so you need to have those complementary skill sets. So we look at all of that. After that, some of the investors have filters and they have some investment thesis, which is very unique to them. Like there are some funds who only back technology companies. There are some funds who only back consumer-facing companies. Like we companies that are chasing impacts. We are backing startups and entrepreneurs who are chasing impact. So, like for example, SLC has invested in. I could tell you about two investments. One is in a liquid biopsy company, which is building an IP in cancer research, and they are Indian entrepreneurs. And the other is it's a drone company. So what they do is they use drone technology to sort of give us data and even map renewable assets. So they kind of cut down on the logistics. Plus, they know how to manage your renewable assets. Okay. So basically, I hope that gives you an idea about what this is.
So, like, if an entrepreneur is just starting out, how many years he should think, how many years ahead he should have a concrete plan, like 3 years, 5 years, or 7 years down the lane? Like, what would be your recommendation on the same?
See, concrete plan, you should have like a very long-term view. It's not even 3 to 5 years or 10 years. You'll have to look at an idea of how it's going to pan out for the next maybe 20 years. Let's not have a short-term view on it. So you can then put business plans over, 6 months. And let me tell you, business plans, none of the 3 years business plans actually pan out. None of the business plans entrepreneurs ever make pan out. Even 6 months also, they'll tell you they'll do this, but they go ahead and do something else. Because that's the nature of the market. Okay, so the pivoting is very, very common in early stage startups. So you obviously cannot, have a very concrete 3 years, 5 years. You can put down a business plan which eventually will be a guiding guidance to you and to your investors. But actually, as an entrepreneur, you should have a very, very clear, maybe 20, 25 years, eternity, if possible, a horizon. Because then you will start thinking businesses. Then you will think of, cyclical economy. You're not going to just think, oh, so I have to think like 25 years. What can I do in 5 years? So the most important skill actually, the entrepreneur, or this separates successful startups from not so successful startups, is the ability to envision or the ability to dream out or the availability sort of to, in a sense, predict or at least, just have that intuition about picking on the trends that are likely to become big because you're going to be ahead, at least 10 years ahead of the curve. You have to anticipate what is going to happen in the next 5 years and build for that today. That's how you need to do. And then, of course, everything else is a technicality. Building out business plans is a technicality, which you obviously have to continue to do. And in fact, I recommend 6 months big business plans so that, you continue to sort of reorient yourself and be open to the idea that you have to be very agile and dynamic about it.
Okay. And do you think like empathy also plays a crucial element? As you said, some people are just focusing on leaving their 9 to 5 job and making money. On the other side, you said that you have to think what the market is demanding for, what is the actual problem that you need to solve. So do you think along with intuition, empathy is also a crucial element for the same?
Oh yes, I think it's an evolution process. So so many people get humbled by entrepreneurship because they think it's it seems so glamorous and it seems like something somebody achieved, rags to riches stories. But actually, it's such a humbling and experience every single day. Your learning curve is like really steep, really steep as an entrepreneur. So I think that if you lack empathy, you would not be successful as an entrepreneur. You may be successful in the short term, perhaps, but you will not succeed. So empathy is a very core skill because you've got to be able to, you've got to be able to tune in to the consumer, tune into your market, tune into your stakeholders, your investors. So all of that can't be done without empathy. And I think all human beings have it inherently. Only that, you have to, you have to maybe sometimes keep polishing it before it kind of shines and becomes, sort of apparent. Yeah.
Thanks a lot for interviews. You said that investors assess startups by their ability to build teams, and you have also said this just now. So I would like you to elaborate on the same, like how, like why is it so, and what should be the ideal process for the same?
Yeah. So like I've talked about it previously, right? That like you've got to bring your core skill to the table. Okay. And you don't want to, it seems like an entrepreneur is somebody, the popular definition of an entrepreneur is that somebody who bahut jugad hota hai, he can do anything and everything, jack of all trades and master of none, sort of a situation. So yeah, there is a play for a journalist. I mean, I'm not saying that there isn't a play for a journalist, but in today's time, and especially after the post-COVID era and looking forward, the dynamism of the marketplace, it's becoming extremely critical for you to have one core skill and own that skill. Money, you need to be a master of that skill. Okay. Then the other skills you have to still develop. Okay. But then you cannot be 10 on 10 on all other skills. You may be 7 on 10, 6 on 10, something, it's okay. But there should be one thing that you're 10 on 10 on. Okay. Then you find a like-minded, aligned, let's say, either a founding team member or your team members who are aligned to you on your, I call it value ethical paradigm. Like the ethics have to match, the values have to match. What are you chasing? What's your vision? What's your passion? That is the basic alignment you need to have. And then you find somebody who has a complementary skill set to you. So as you can see, entrepreneurship is a game about a lot of self-reflection, of self-awareness. It's actually really that, getting to know what you're really good at and then spotting, those skills in others also. And then you make sure that you form teams and collaborations because that will drive your business idea forward. Okay. So I'm not saying that there are single founder entities. I'm a single founder myself. Yeah. But then you need to be very, very aware of what your skills are, what you're offering. In your team, you've got to find those complementary skill sets. So you could be a single founder, you could be multiple founders, that doesn't matter. But make sure that your core team, there's always a core team that's that's a mix of complementary skill sets.
Okay, that's something. I think that was something that I was seeking for. You have assessed thousands of business pitches in your career. So any tips and tricks for budding entrepreneurs to create and present a solid and well-proved pitch?
Well, I think first of all, a business pitch should never be to impress. Okay. It should always be to engage in a dialogue. Okay. And I think most often entrepreneurs go to investors and okay, so this is the investor and this is an entrepreneur and this is supposed to be like I'm asking you for. I think that attitude has to shift if you have to make a successful presentation or a pitch, wherein I think you first of all go as somebody who has a proposition in which you can come as equals. First of all, you talk to them in a way that is not like, oh, give me the money, not like that. You'll have to, a pitch has to show the path, has to lay the ground, has to lay out the vision very, very beautifully. So even if there's the fundamentals of pitch remain the same, whether you're trying to recruit a co-founder for your company, or you're trying to recruit a team member for your company, or you're trying to recruit or maybe co-partner and collaborate with an investor. The fundamentals have to remain the same in terms of so it should lay out a vision, it should excite people, it should give them this purpose. So that's the softer aspect of what a pitch should do. Okay. And of course, you'll have to be very, very clear about the deliverables that you're committing. And so many times entrepreneurs have the habit to overcome it or underthink on certain things and go and overcome it on deliverables. So, it's okay. It's okay to say, hey, I'm not good at this. I'm figuring this out. It's okay to say that even in a pitch. Okay. So when you go and project something, so maybe somebody will bite it, maybe an investor will bite it, but eventually, if you cannot execute on your promise, then it's not going to work out for anybody. So please do not overcommit or overpitch on whatever you're doing, right? Think it through, and spend a lot of time pre-pitching. So I think a perfect pitch for me will be is when an entrepreneur has done his homework, and that includes getting to know their investors thoroughly also. So when you're talking to maybe 5 investors, so the pitch should only be a formality, meaning you should come to a point where you can be almost certain that this is 100% closure. Come to that point that you're going there to close. Don't go, because see, investors don't have the time for you to, like, I know, I mean, it's a catch 22, but you can't be practicing your pitch with me. You know what I mean? I mean, you have to be very, very, very clear, and you should come to me at a point. Any investor, even if it's an early stage investor, you should come with a very concrete value proposition. Okay, there should not be any loopholes. You come and say, hey, now, so this is what I'm looking for. What is my ask? Okay, let's say 2 crores. So where is the dotted line? This is the dotted line. It should be that. It should not be like presumptuous that maybe I'll get it and maybe I will not get it, because you have to make sure that when you go with the mindset of the fact that you're going to, make this work. So that should be and don't pitch to everybody. Another thing entrepreneurs do is that they start sending their pitch deck like, it's some kind of a commodity.
Yeah.
Okay. And tell you, nobody reads those. Nobody has the time to read those, pitch templates. Nobody has the time to go through it. So be very, very clear. Do a lot of homework before pitching. Okay. So then when you go and actually when you are delivering on your pitch, it should be like, it should be a closure discussion and not, okay. So I hope that, to me, that will be a good pitch.
Yeah, that was perfectly explained. And so, but before proceeding, I would like to know your opinion on presenting the budget portion in the pitch, the specific budget portion that we have in the pitch.
Yeah, you will have to put out financials. And personally, I'd like to, there are a lot of investors who also get very excited with even ideas, and they like to even back pre-revenue startups, or maybe if, there's no concrete business. But I personally, and through SLSV, we like to see a concrete business plan. We'd like to see, and we understand that we could pivot, and there could be sort of variations to it. But we'd like to see, what your revenue objectives are. How are you going to, whatever timeframes you put, what is the plan of getting that revenue? What is the cost to revenue? How are you going to expand your team? So we'd like to see very, very granular thinking on the business plan.
Okay. Opinion, what is the process of incorporating strategic corporate social responsibility in firms?
So see, like I said, what we are trying to do here is work with corporates and show them the path to making strategic investments. Okay, strategic investments into on the ESG parameters, environmental, social, and governance issues, called ESG investing, right? So there is also another form of investment called SDG, which is SDG goals, UN Sustainable Development Goals investing. So UN has defined certain areas which are called Sustainable Development Goals. And there are certain funds in the market now which actually go to startups who are chasing SDG goals. Or, I mean, it needs to be already in your blueprint. It's not something that you decide, okay, later I also do this and I may also be doing it. It's something that, you decide on the blueprint. So for us, CSR is only a route to do that, because instead of putting CSR into and treating CSR just as a compliance, we are sort of encouraging corporates to look at CSR as a strategic investments, which they can make, let's say, behind. So you can invest in incubators now. So those are the kind of recommendations we make to corporates. Or we actually custom create projects for them in partnership with NGOs. So for example, we are just in the process of creating a project which is about entrepreneurship development. meaning teaching entrepreneurship skills in tier 2 and tier 3 cities, like people like yourself, right to school level, meaning class 11 and 12th. So, that's a big gap that we realize. So, we are actually trying to see if we can tie with government schools and actually introduce a course like that. So, and of course, the corporate can come in, so they can invest their CSR money behind these initiatives. So, the overall idea is to see how corporate can bring about tangible change in terms of on the ESG parameters, and that eventually of course benefits their bottom line only. So eventually it is something that benefits them immensely. So that's really what we are trying to do through SLS. So don't treat CSR as a liability, treat it as a strategic investment, and make those investments behind causes that are aligned to your business operations. Okay. What you do in philanthropy, from the goodness of my heart, I like some cause and let's just put some money behind that cause. But you're not looking at it as a sustainable long-term investment in a cause. You're just doing it from the goodness of your heart. And that's very, very common in the corporate sector. It's done very, very generously. Even before the law came, there was enough and more that the corporates were doing. Okay, and they were doing it from the goodness of their heart, and they said, okay, it's the good deed done, gone. What we are now saying is that continue to do the good deed, but make it a part of your business imprint. Make it a part of your mainstream business operations. So that's what we're trying to do through SLS. Is that we also incubate businesses. So the exciting development, which you will hear soon, is that SLSC has incubated plant-based food alternatives over the last 4 years. So SLSC has created this product line, which are nutritional superiors to available staples like milk and cheese and yogurts. These are the staples. So as you know, they come at a very high cost to the environment. They come at a very high cost to human health. So SLSV has created and incubated, and we are ready to now go to market with those propositions. So that's another thing that we do.
That's a modern sense of business, and that's something new for me. Because I have learned, this concept as a statement or as just a random concept, but actually implementing it within the business is something new for me. And now, after listening to your answer, now I'm actually able to visualize how the good deeds can also be converted into a monetizable thing. So now moving on the other side, on the personal side, do you believe in the presence of a guiding force that help us to identify and align with the purpose? Has there been any personal incident that has strengthened your belief for the same?
No, absolutely. There is always a guiding force, and I believe there's a guiding force somewhere within us. That's that inner voice, as it's called. Yeah. And then I feel that there is this universal energy which floats all around you. Yeah. So I think the trick is to be in alignment with your inner voice and this universal energy that floats freely around you. And the trick is to be, I think, in constant dialogue and in alignment with that energy. So some people may call it God, some people call it the universe, some people call it something. But I think the way I have experienced it is like this. I mean, I think that if you quieten your mind and quieten the chatter and the loud noises around you, you can always hear a voice, constantly a voice speaking to you and guiding you towards your highest good. Always. So that self-dialogue is, I think, is the key.
And any personal incident which actually made you realize, because as we are born as a child, we are unconscious of our state and we are just unconscious of our presence. So was there any particular incident in your life that made you more self-aware or that made you listen thoroughly to that universal force?
I would think that there was a watershed moment for me at the time that, so I practice Buddhism,
Mhm.
and I also practice Reiki. There's a form of healing and personal development. Um, so for me, I think there was this one moment of time that when I got introduced to Meher Baba, and as you know, he's not in a physical form, but
Mhm.
his samadhi is at Ahmednagar in Maharashtra. It's called Mehrabad. So my first experience of actually hearing the voice and feeling the experience was when I went to Meher Baba's shrine, and I actually did experientially felt the presence. Like you hear it, you know there's a God, you know that there is an inner voice, and you know that there is this guiding light. But I experientially felt it when I visited, and ever since then, I've formed a very close connection to Mir Baba, and I continue to sort of, every morning when I get up and say, hey, you tell me, I surrender to the voice and say, okay, you tell me what I need to do today, because our mind is limited in terms of its processing of
Yeah.
of what the potential is. But if you're able to have the courage, so people think that surrender is a very cowardly action, but I think surrender requires a lot of courage to do. So yeah,
Mm,
that's what I'd like.
yeah, I can completely align to that. I have a different story, but yeah, I can completely align to that. You hail from a community where art and storytelling was a way of living. Did this culture help you to develop your intuition to identify true and different entrepreneurship stories within your professional career?
I would absolutely think so. I think I do channel a lot of creative energy, and I'm an incorrigible optimist, and I've been in retrospect, like in hindsight, I realized that I took on ideas which were very, very high on creative energy, like all the assignments that I took up, all the, even the roles, corporate roles that I take, they were very high on creative energy. And most people used to tell me they are very high risk ventures. So, people look at my profile and say, wow, you have such an amazing risk taking appetite. But, I never thought they were risks. I didn't have that. I didn't think it was risk,
Mhm.
because if you have a very clear idea of how to, uh, actually, there are no risks. We
Uh-huh.
continue to, have this whole idea of, oh, risk reward. There are no risks. You can totally eliminate the risk. You don't have to be, head first into something and then figure out. But like I
Mhm.
said, if you do a lot of your groundwork, there is a process. So if you can apply a process to that so-called risk, you can have disproportionate amount of reward coming from there. So you have to figure out a way of applying the creative energy to so-called risk, and using that energy to then explore that proposition. And at the time, like I didn't think I was employing a process. Like when I joined CNBC TV 18, or even the other, even Madison, which was a campus placement, but these were very, very new ideas. I mean, they were hardly 4 or 5 employees, and nobody was doing those things at the time. And I used to work out of a mezzanine floor in my first job. And you're coming from the top 5 business schools,
Mhm.
and wants to work like that. But I just felt that was such a futuristic idea, and I wanted to back that and wanted to be a part of that excitement. Similarly, CNBC TV 18, it was a shed company. Like we used to work from Recondo compound. It was a car shed, unused car shed. But I mean, I was very excited at the time with the digital business channel, and there was no business channel at that time. They were the first.
Yeah.
So I thought, wow, this is exciting. This is something that you can create for the future. This is something that's not been done before. So, and in retrospect, all of these are very, very successful businesses today. They are very, very successful. Even till date, they are they were the early starters, and then they have defined the way the markets now behave. So I think I would give full marks to whatever sensor I had to pick on these, opportunities. But even I don't know what that is. I don't know because, but I'm very grateful to whatever that sensor is. I don't know what it is, but I think, yeah.
Yeah, that was an enchanting answer. I really don't know how to, take ahead and compliment you with your answer, because this is something natural. This is like, now I feel like a universal energy is around you and me while we are having this conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. I know that's the beauty of it, right? Just to
Yeah.
live in that, just to live in that awareness.
Mm-hmm. Your father was a source of inspiration for you. You have already said on many of your interviews. So, how has your father exactly impacted your personality?
Oh, I mean, in so many ways. I think in so many ways in which I am aware of it, and in so many ways that I'm not even aware of. I think he's the voice in my head. We lost him last year to cancer, and he was so brave, and he gave such a brave fight to his disease. And so much so that we were the last year of his life. It was every day we were making sure we were having a celebration of sorts.
Mhm.
So in how many ways I think it will be so difficult to actually sort of even know yourself in how many ways, so he's like the voice in my head. He's like the internal radar. There are so many things. And also, there was one time in school that I wasn't doing so well in school. And I think my dad went for a parent teachers meeting, and I think they may have told her, oh, she has the potential, but I don't know why she's not doing it. You know how the teachers say that she can do it. I'm not sure why she's not doing it and why her performance is so poor. So, see, any other parent would come back, and I don't know how they will relay that feedback. But when he came back to me, I told him, I said, how was it? Because you know how kids are so nervous about the parents teachers meeting. All kids are saying, my God, we don't know kya bataya hoga teachers ne. But so I was very, of course, excited about it and also very nervous. So he comes to me and he just holds my hand and says, I said, Papa, how was it? How did it go? What did they tell you? So he held my hand, and said, look, he held my hand, he looked at me and he looked in my eyes and he says, I just want you to know that, do you know you can do anything you set your mind to? I said, okay. He's saying, yeah, I want you to know you can do anything that you set your mind to. Anything, whatever you want, you can achieve. So I said, okay. So, and especially you, whatever you want to achieve, whatever you put your mind to, you can achieve. I promise you this. It's a guarantee, he told me. So I think, I think in so many ways, he was so delicate about a lot of things in the way he handled it with me. And I think he was like my backbone. And at one time I used to think, oh, I've got to be independent. I mean, I used to think that this level of emotional dependence, at some level, I have to be, and I used to think all that. And I think that's why I took on the spiritual practice, so that I can find my own center. Ultimately, even if it's your father or your mother, you have to. It's your responsibility to find your own center, your own calling, your own voice, and listen to your own voice. So I think I understood that a few years back, and I said, hey, as much as it is love and as much as it's beautiful, I've got to still find my own center. And coming back to, we all are very inspired by how people live, but I think more inspiring is how people die. And when I think that's really very inspiring, and I think that ultimately to me is the measure of success. So because when he passed on, this was last October last year. And of course, I was feeling you feel broken. You feel your spine is like you're spineless now, and you don't have a center. You're feeling that sense of grave loss. But within, I think, 15-20 minutes of him passing over, the news, of course, spread far and wide. And he has so many admirers across the world. And for some reason, I started receiving so many calls talking about people crying to me how they have lost their everything, what he meant for them. And in a way, this whole experience showed me that, it's uh, it's a shared sense of grief. I thought only I lost somebody. And then I realized that he had such touched so many million lives, where actually everybody felt as if he was just that one core center of for them. So he had that gift. So for me, I think, like I said, that for me, I was so touched with his life and the way he lived, but I think I was more touched by the way he had passed on and the legacy he's left behind, not as concrete, large buildings, but as this imprint in the hearts of people. So we've set up Jafi Foundation to sort of capture his spirit. It's my mother, me, and my siblings. We've come together, and a couple of his very close associates. We have all come together to set up this foundation called Jafi Foundation, which we continue to further his vision and continue to support local art and culture, continue to support, languages like Urdu and Sanskrit and works and the writers in those languages, continue support innovation in art and culture. So those are the kind of things that we will commit to take forward. So that's really, I know, not a short answer, but yeah, that's what I can say at this moment.
So I'm so humbled to listen your answer, and thanks a lot for sharing your authentic story. And I thoroughly celebrate your father's journey, and I'm so grateful to have a personality like you. And lastly, a message that you want to give to young girls and women who might be listening to this podcast episode.
Yeah, I mean, see, all I have to say is that it is going to be the century of women. It's come. Okay, so that's one thing that we need to know. So that's not even a contention anymore. So women have found their rightful place, and they will continue to kind of move up. But pretty much, I think if you were to call it balance of power, I don't know, for the lack of a better word, I think that's evenly placed today. And I think I'm just talking about energetically. Okay, so I think now uh, women, when they come into leadership roles, and they're going to be increasingly coming to be in that, and they're going to be the voice and the face, I think they should continue to be cognizant of taking everybody along and not make the same mistakes that have been made before. So what happens? So when men were leading and they made the mistake of perhaps not, or they lack the ability to take everybody along.
Yeah.
So I think if women are in leadership roles, they should not repeat that same story. And in the name of this feminism, let's not discard what is ours. I mean, every gender is special. Every gender has its own. It's only the social conditioning and some outdated norms. Only they need to change. The love between people, the camaraderie, the natural connection between genders. That cannot be sort of sacrificed in the name of empowerment. Is it making sense? Is that making
Yeah,
sense?
I can understand. Yeah.
Okay, so I think that women, as they come into roles of prominence and leadership, they will have to make extra effort not to leave anybody,
Yeah.
not to leave anybody behind. Okay, so it's not like, oh, so now it was the era of men, and now this is the era of,
Exactly.
that's not, again, there's no
Yeah, it should
balance in that
be
equation.
an era of actual equality.
Yes, let's get into an era of actual equality, and I think that's the responsibility of every woman who will be thrust into the role of leadership, or they'll take on that mantle and they'll take on that responsibility. So let's just not make that mistake again.
Thanks a
Yeah.
lot again for coming to this podcast, and I really, really do hope that this episode would reach, miles ahead and would make a greater impact which it meant to make.
Great. I wish you all the best and thank you so much. And likewise, I really enjoyed being here, having this conversation with you. And I really hope that, there are more women like you who take up, more initiative and do try to do these impossible things. It will be so wonderful to see that happening. Thank you, Kushi. And I look forward to, interacting with you again.